Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to be talking about my Diamond Tier Rank Up Historic deck, Umori Sorceries. So, a lot of you are going to be wondering, how in the world did this happen? Because when you think Umori, you don't think Sorceries, and you also don't think functional Historic deck. So, I was sorting through my paper collection, and I found my one copy of Umori sitting amongst my bulk. And recently I've been having a really bad time in Historic, running a few different strategies such as Rakdos Blood, Boros Heroic, and Bant Yorion, and none of those were working. So, after seeing my Umori just sitting there on my desk, I decided I would just throw something together to complete the daily challenge, which was run Golgari colors and cast 20 Golgari spells. What happened, though, is that it was really good. Despite being a deck with only sorceries in it, I went from being stuck at the bottom of Platinum, which I had been for over a week at this point, to ranking up all the way to Diamond in a near clean sweep. Umori Sorceries took down various Tier 1 decks, such as Golgari Cat Oven, featuring Lurrus, Blue-White Auras, also Lurrus, Heliod Company, Izzet Phoenix, Blue-White Control, Rakdos Sacrifice, also Lurrus, and several Tier 2 decks like Mono Red Aggro, Grixis Control, and Dimir Rogues, also featuring Lurrus. But I bet you're wondering, so let's move on to the deck list. Well, here we are with the list, and yep, that's a lot of sorceries. So, let's look over it card by card here. First up, we have Umori, the Companion, which the requirement is we run all of one type, and the one type I chose was sorceries. Main reason I did this was for Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozilek. I feel as though these cards are some of the most important cards you can run in any black deck at the moment, and yeah, these cards are really powerful. And Bloodchief's Thirst is also a pretty powerful card, and pretty premium removal that you can also run in the 1-drop spot, so this control suite is very nice. Another pretty powerful card was Chainer's Edict, being a card that just is a sorcery speed. Target player sacrifices a creature with flashback for 7. This card sees a lot of play in Pauper, and it's a very powerful 2-for-1, and because of how much mana this deck can get to, you are often going to be able to cast Chainer's Edict both for its front half and for its flashback cost. So, just good value here. Hunt for Specimens. Honestly, looking at this card, it looks like it would be terrible, but honestly, it was pretty great. Being able to tutor a card off of the lesson board and get a 1/1 token to block early big threats was very nice. And up next we have 4 copies of Explore, getting an additional land down and drawing a card. Usually you can just cycle this. Sometimes you can cycle it in, then play a Temple down to get a Scry, which can be really nice. And it helps you get to Cultivate a bit faster. Up next we have Go Blank. Having 2 of these in the main board because there's some matchups where this card just breaks the opponent's deck. 1 copy of Cry of the Carnarium. It's a board nuke that hits a lot of small creatures. We have 4 copies of Bala Get Recovery, just a way to buy back a lot of the top-end threats of this deck. 4 copies of Cultivate. Yeah, getting down lands faster than your opponent is nice, especially when the way you intend to beat your opponents down is with big spells. 1 copy of Culling Ritual, a similar scenario to Cry of the Carnarium. Often you're going to use this in either cast something like Cultivate or buy the Umori from the side deck. Then we have 1 copy of Invoked Despair. This is generally one of the better ways you can help close out a game, by edicting your opponent for 1 to 2 permanents and then damaging them quite a bit and then getting a good draw off of it. This is usually something that you will want to be buying back with your Bala Get Recoveries because it'll just be drawing you into more advantage things, whether that be more Hunt for Specimens or just additional hand control cards to be able to take apart the rest of your opponent's value. And then finally in the main deck we have 2 copies of Casualties of War. This is an extremely big and splashy spell, but it's still incredibly powerful. Being able to 2-for-1 your opponent a lot of the time, and sometimes 3 or 4 for one in your opponent, is incredibly powerful. And it's incredibly powerful when you're almost always going to be doing it more than once. Valgutter Recovery is a good card, and 2 I feel is like a pretty good number to hit with this, because it means you're probably going to see it, and if you see it, you're probably going to see at least 1 Valgutter Recovery, and casting this twice basically is going to take any opponent out of the game. If there's one thing I would have changed about the main deck, it's that I'd find a way to get a second Invoked Despair into the deck, but I don't currently have one on my account, so I could only run the one. But I would probably find a way to stick another one of these in here. On to lands, we got 4 basic swamps, 4 basic forests. This is just to be able to search off the cultivate, need a good number of basics. 1 copy of Lair of the Hydra, need a good man land, and Lair of the Hydra is a pretty powerful one. We got 4 Darkboard Pathway, 2 copies of Deathclap Glade. You need to have untapped lands, so not running too many of these. Have 4 copies of Overgrown Tomb, 3 copies of Temple of Malady. The Scry is pretty important because you don't have a lot of traditional card advantage engines in the deck. We have 1 copy of Indatha Triome. I've been thinking about cutting this for a Castle Locthwain, but Indatha Triome is still pretty good. And 1 copy of Crawling Barrens. It's a similar scenario to Lair of the Hydra. The difference is it doesn't come in tapped, but it is a colorless mana source. Now on to the sideboard. We have 3 copies of Duress. This card, well, it's Duress. You cite it in during control matchups, takes non-creatures out of your opponent's hands. 1 copy of Environmental Sciences, just a way to search off a land and gain a little bit of life off of Hunt for Specimens. We got 3 copies of Necromentia. This is for those weird out there matchups, or for matchups that are otherwise really hard to deal with, due to 1 card in particular. This card mostly came in clutch against stuff like Heliod Company, because Heliod isn't super easy to deal with, because the only main deck way to be able to remove it is via an Invoked Despair, which it was possible, but because there's only 1 copy in the list at the moment, hitting it with Necromentia usually just meant you just win the game from there, because they don't really have a good way to deal with the rest of your stuff. 2 copies of Go Blank, good against Graveyard Strategies, and good against Control. Just a lot of good ways to break Control. We have 1 copy of Necrotic Fumes. It's a searchable kill spell for target creatures or planeswalkers, and because you're searching it off of the Hunt for Specimens, you will always have a creature to exile to it. 1 copy of Containment Breach. It's a way to destroy a artifact or enchantment. Sometimes you'll get the Pest. Often it's usually being used to kill something bigger than CMC 2 or less. 1 copy of Pest Summonings, because sometimes you need additional blockers, but you won't have enough mana to play the Mascot Exhibition. 1 copy of Introduction to Prophecy. Felt myself searching this one quite a bit, because bad Preordain is still Preordain, and it helps dig to either Casualties of War or Invoked Despair, or something else, but usually those 2. Then we had 1 copy of Mascot Exhibition. This card just closes out the game. Short and simple, puts 9 power on board. Sometimes your opponents can deal with it, but 9 power on board is usually going to be able to get you there. Okay, here we are with the matchups. So let's start off with the ones that didn't feel great. The only matchups that I felt were pretty hard were things like Mono Blue Tempo, Simic Flash, and Burn. The reason why Tempo and Flash were difficult was because those decks are full to the brim with instant speed counters. If you're not able to Duress them or Thoughtseize them or Inquisition them on turn 1, they will have a way to counter any of your hand disruption or just any of your interaction for the rest of the game. And because they can play at instant speed, they can just wait to the end step, flash in a threat like a Spectral Sailor, suited up with a Curiosity effect, and then be able to out-tempo you for the rest of the game. So those 2 decks were 2 of the few that felt bad. The only other one that felt pretty bad, that didn't feel as bad though, was Burn. And that's for the reason of sometimes you just don't draw into the things that gain you life, and you have a lot of ways to deal with creatures, you don't have as many ways to deal with burn spells hitting you in the face over and over, and especially if you are drawing the wrong hand disruption pieces to take away the burn spells at the wrong time. The only other matchup that didn't feel great, but felt kind of medium, was Heliod/Company lists, where they were putting down really tough to deal with threats, or with the company cards being too big to be able to deal with. This made me want to have a copy or two of Languish in the sideboard, but I don't have Languish on my account, but I feel as though that would be a better way to be able to shore up those matchups. But it wasn't a bad matchup per se, because the interaction was still able to get me there quite a few times. It's just a deck I also saw a lot. But aside from those, everything else felt favored. Lurrus decks folded to the onslaught of removal spells like the Bloodchief's Curse and Chainer's Edict, which helped kind of tear the deck's field apart and was able to get the Lurrus off of the board. And also the main deck Go Blanks kind of helped rip any resources they had away before the Lurrus was ever deployed. Another thing, control decks tended to fall apart to all the hand destruction that I was running. Having 6 in the main board and then 3 in the side to throw in after the fact meant that you were almost always going to be able to draw something to be able to interact with them on turn 1, which, if you stop their engine before it gets going, it makes it pretty easy to just sort of run away with the game. The deck was extremely grindy and was able to grind out most mid-range matches. The only ones that it didn't were the ones where I drew too many lands. Another really powerful part about this deck was having a massive lesson board, which meant that there was a lot of flexible answers to a lot of different scenarios. And let's talk about the wrap-up now. Companions are strong, even ones with restrictions like Umori. Just having that extra 4 or 5 sitting off to the side that you can just pay 3 mana at any time to grab was incredibly powerful. And another thing is that the Golgari ramp package is pretty strong, and I'm slightly surprised nothing else is really running it. Getting to be at 5 lands when an opponent's only on 3 really tends to swing things in your favor when you get that wonderful turn of Explore into Cultivate on the following turn. And another thing, Casualties of War and Invoked Despair. These are crazy powerful cards with crazy good tempo swings, and a lot of decks aren't prepared for you to deploy a massive sweeper like these two. Well, thank you all for watching. If you want more Magic the Gathering content like this, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you have an excellent day, and if this video gets up to, say, 10 likes, I'll try to upload some gameplay content of this deck. Bye.